This is Mr. Gideon. So, we just recently talked about the idea, the model of how specialization in trade between two countries can promote long-term economic growth. We've talked about the importance of long-term economic growth and the model that uses production possibilities frontiers as a way to explain the advantages and the potential benefits of specialization in trade because of comparative advantage all came from David Ricardo. If it's true that free and open trade is a way of promoting what is the equivalent of long-run economic growth, then why do countries today have trade restrictions? Well, let's go back and think about some material that was covered earlier in the semester again. The costs of trades or transaction costs. Those are relevant here. Potential trade, if you'll recall, might not become an actual trade if transaction costs are too high. And we said before that transaction costs are the costs associated with the time and effort and also sometimes the money needed to search out, negotiate, and consummate a trade. Entrepreneurs, amongst other things, specialize in trying to reduce those transaction costs to make the trades actually take place. If the transaction costs aren't too high and the two sides negotiate terms of trade that are good for both sides, they could use their comparative advantage to mutual benefit, but they don't always. And that's because sometimes the costs still outweigh the potential benefits beyond time, beyond money, beyond effort. And that's what I want to talk about here, the arguments for restricting trade. But first, we have to understand two basic terms, or tools that are used to restrict trade between countries. One is a quota, which is a legal limit on the amount of a good that may be imported into a country. So if we say, as a matter of principle, because of X, Y, and Z reasons, the United States will not ever import any more than 5 tons of pork from Canada. That would be an example of a quota. Another tool is a tariff, a tax on an import which serves the same purpose as a quota. But why? Why would countries use trade restrictions? What transaction costs are too high to just allow free and open trade? Well, that's what we're going to discuss here briefly. There are several arguments that people might advance to use these tools of quotas and tariffs. One is the national defense argument. Some industries, for instance, like weapons and chemical production, are typically used for national defense. So, let's say that the United States felt that they could get a good financial deal by importing guns and military equipment from China. If we felt that there was a decent chance sometime in the not so distant future that we would have armed conflict against China, that might not be the best strategy today to be importing things that we would need to fight against China from China. Because of course, if that event came to pass, they would stop exporting to us those things that we would need to try to fight them. Now, why is this even an argument with regards to China? Because, as you know, China produces all kinds of products very cheaply that they export to us. And we are very grateful for that because, as Americans, we love a deal. We love the lowest price possible. But not with regards to national defense items. This is a situation that could become heated. There is the island of Taiwan, just south of mainland China, who for decades has been claiming some degree of independence or sovereignty from China. And we have, as a country, recognized their sovereignty. China, on the other hand, says that Taiwan is a part of China. And we have ships that are stationed not too far off the coast from China and Taiwan. Periodically, there are arguments, there's political rhetoric in that part of the world that becomes tense, and understandably, there are Americans that get worried and they say, wow, well, if for some reason there's a military provocation, and we've said we are an ally to Taiwan, that might mean that we are now going to be drawn into a military conflict with China. and that would not be a good situation for either party. But we would be in an even more difficult position in that kind of event if we had been importing the weapons, tanks, whatever we would need to fight against China at that point. We would really be significantly weakened because they're not going to continue to send us those things, obviously. You could make this argument with any two countries out there that could potentially come into conflict in the future. This is why most countries like to produce their own weapons and other kinds of supplies that could be related to their national defense. The infant industry argument is another argument for restricting trade. It says that infant or newly emerging industries often need protection from older, established foreign competitors until they are mature enough to compete on their own. Maybe there is a long tradition of coffee production in Ethiopia, in certain parts of Latin America, in Indonesia, and other parts of Asia that are placed around the equator. But we say we want to get into the coffee game. We see how much consumption there is in the United States. Well, that would be a relatively new endeavor for us. And it would be difficult for coffee producers in this country, American coffee producers, to be able to compete on the global stage against other more well-established coffee producers. And so we might say, you know what? We're going to restrict how much coffee we're going to import from these other countries that I mentioned that have been doing it well for a long time, so that we give American coffee producers a chance to get a foothold in the global marketplace. There are all kinds of industries that we can use as an example of this argument. Another argument is the anti-dumping argument. So dumping, which is the sale of exports at a price below cost and below domestic competition, as the argument goes, must be stopped before it penetrates a market and drives domestic producers out of business, after which the exporters can raise their prices. So, for instance, you may have heard this once again as a charge levied against China that they have been dumping certain kinds of products in the United States. And you might have asked yourselves, what do you mean by dumping? Are they throwing trash away? No, they're selling products. For example, shrimp in the United States. But the dumping tag refers specifically to them selling at below their own cost. And of course, at a price that would be below what American producers would sell something like shrimp at in the marketplace. And you ask yourself, why? Why would they do that? Why would they sell at such a ridiculously low price? Not just a low price, a price that is below their cost. They're losing money on the sale of shrimp in the United States. The argument is that they're willing to put up with short-term pain if it drives the American producers out of business permanently, and then after that they'll raise their prices, and in the long run it will be beneficial for them. That's what dumping's all about. So sometimes countries say, we're only going to import so much from a certain country, or we're going to put tariffs on those imports, or both, because we want to discourage dumping. We don't want to give them the chance to dump into our domestic marketplace and drive our producers out of business forever. Another argument is the low foreign wages argument, that some domestic producers could have trouble competing with foreign producers who pay their workers less. This is also a very hot political issue in the United States, particularly as we get closer to a presidential election. So that's something that I would keep in mind as you watch debates and we approach the next presidential election cycle, because periodically in debates about trade and global economics, this is something that gets brought up. How are we, as Americans, going to continue to provide good paying, fair labor for American workers who have to compete with workers from other countries who might be willing to accept less of an hourly wage, accept less in terms of benefits, possibly no benefits, and who sometimes are taken advantage of because there are still sweatshops across the globe. There is even slavery in many parts across the globe. So how do we address this? Well, sometimes countries choose quotas or tariffs as a way to address the foreign wages argument and to protect domestic jobs, which is really an all-encompassing argument. It's the last argument on this page, but there are really overtones of trying to save domestic jobs in more than one of the other arguments.